New music commissioned for masses is a rarity these days, but in 2018, Frank La ROCCA composed something called the Mass of the Americas. And on Friday, September 23rd, Capella Records will release the new CD, the Mass of the Americas, performed by the Benedict XVI Choir. And here to tell us about it is the man who originally commissioned the piece, San Francisco Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone, and the aforementioned composer, Frank La ROCCA. Thank you both for being here. Your Excellency, before we discuss the CD, I want to go back to the origins of this music. You commissioned this for the Mass of the Americas. It premiered in December of 2018 at an ordinary form Mass in the San Francisco's Cathedral. Why did you want a Mass of the Americas, and why commission special music to accompany it?
Yes, I founded the Benedict XVI Institute for Sacred Music and Divine Worship to elevate our worship, to inspire more beautiful and reverent liturgies. Frank and I knew each other from years before when I was the Bishop of Oakland, and I saw the potential of his compositional ability. So at the beginning of 2018, I was looking at the calendar for the year. In our archdiocese, we have an archdiocesan-wide celebration of Our Lady of Guadalupe this Saturday before the feast day. And I noticed in 2018 that that day would be December 8th. So a holy day of obligation in the United States because the Immaculate Conception is our patroness. So people of all ethnicities would be attending Mass that day, but at our cathedral and with the 6 to 8 hour long procession beginning south of San Francisco with the festivities of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to elevate Our Lady as the one who unifies all of us as God's children. We all love Our Lady. And I saw this as an opportunity, especially with all the controversies we have with the conflicts we're experiencing and the divisions of society, to unite us, different ethnicities, different languages, both sides of the border. So I envisioned this Mass of a twin tribute to Our Lady of Guadalupe and Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. So I asked Frank to incorporate the sounds and the melodies of the popular songs the Mexican people sing to Our Lady of Guadalupe within the context of sacred music, so to sort of blend this all together so we have a musical composition that expresses the unity we share in the Catholic faith and our love for our Blessed Mother.
And Frank, you composed and created a piece of music. It's really extraordinary. And at one point, the Ave Maria is in the language of the indigenous people of Mexico, the Nahuatl language. This is the first time that a piece of sacred music has been composed using that Aztec language. Why did you choose to do that? And why was it important to you to utilize this particularly ancient tongue of Mexico?
Well, with the focus on Our Lady of Guadalupe, one naturally thinks of the event of her apparitions to St. Juan Diego. And as I put myself as concretely as I could into that reality, it dawned on me that they would have been communicating in his native tongue, which was Nahuatl. And so as a way of making concrete some of the elements of that encounter between Our Lady and St. Juan Diego, I chose to use the language that would have been exchanged between them. Now, finding an authentic translation into that language from the Latin turned out to be, entail a great deal of research. It led me all the way back to a book written by a mestizo priest, Don Bartolome de Alva, whose charge was to bring in the native peoples into the Catholic Church. And so he wrote a small catechism for them, which included translations of the most important prayers into Nahuatl, and that's where I found this translation. Book goes all the way back to 1649.
Amazing. Your Excellency, you commissioned this Mass, and after you did, it became sort of a traveling Mass. You celebrated it all over the country, in cities in the United States, Mexico, Canada. I remember at the Mass, at the of the Americas in 2019 at the Basilica in Washington, and it was celebrated in the form of a pontifical Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. What do you make of the changes Pope Francis has made regarding that Mass and his motu proprio guardians of the tradition, restricting some of the use of that traditional Latin Mass?
It seems to me Pope Francis's concern is on with some people who have approaches with more of a divisive attitude. He must, he has the vision of the world stage. We have a vision more of what's happening in our own country. I know there are some contentions around this. Some people who are who object to the Novus Ordo Mass and have an attitude that this is the only valid way or appropriate way to worship. I think it was trying to address that. I know that attitude is there. Most of the people I know and the bishops I know that love that form of the Mass are not of that attitude. So I think we have to, as bishops in our local churches, we have to do what is best to provide for the pastoral care of our people. You always have to make sure we're preserving a sense of communion. The way I see this is the people who love the traditional Mass, it's technically not what we call an ecclesial movement, as would be, Cursillo, charismatic renewal, neo-Catholic way. But it has that characteristic that these movements, if they're ignored by the church's pastoral leaders, they tend to go off on their own and create kind of a parallel church. But if they are engaged with the leaders, given proper direction and kind of correct extremes, keep them within the fold of the church, they have the potential to renew the church. So I see the traditional Mass in that same way. We need to remain engaged and pastorally embrace our people who love this form of the Mass and make sure we're coming together with a sense of unity in our worship in whichever form that worship is.
Yeah, it strikes me as curious. There seems to be this hypersensitivity among those who might attend the traditional Latin Mass, looking down on the Novus Ordo, but there's no sensitivity in the reverse of people, in the Novus Ordo looking down on the old rite. It's a selective kind of sensitivity, I think, and I don't quite understand it, given the positive things we saw since Summorum Pontificum, which was Pope Benedict's challenge to the Church to bring the old and the new rites together and allow them to exist side by side. I want to give audiences a taste of what they will hear on this new CD. This is from a piece entitled Cantico de Alba. Listen. Frank, it has been about 4 years since you composed the music for the Mass of the Americas. What has been the response, and why wait so long to release a CD?
Well, the response has been incredibly positive, more so than I could ever have anticipated. It seems, for some reason, to have struck a nerve with many people, particularly, I think, those who believe in true enculturation in the Mass and not simply the grafting of different cultural elements together with some hope that somehow they'll fuse into something cohesive. Um, as far as waiting so long, opportunities have to present themselves. Offers to record pieces, major pieces like this, don't just fall out of the sky. And we were fortunate that Blanton Allspaw, the producer, saw an op-ed written by poet James Matthew Wilson, who's a poet in residence at the Institute. He saw this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and it mentioned our conductor, Richard Sparks. He called Richard Sparks, asked him what he was up to, said, I would be very interested in recording this piece for you. So, and then the fundraising, of course, was necessary to take on such a significant expense.
Mm-hmm. Archbishop, you founded the Benedict XVI Institute, as you mentioned earlier, for sacred music and divine worship in your diocese back in 2014. Why did you think that was needed at the time? Was that a response to Summorum Pontificum, or what was it?
It was a desire to see it was really more of a practical vision to see the way that Mass is celebrated in our parishes, to infuse it with greater, as I said before, with greater reverence, with greater beauty, be more inspirational, more a sense of transcendence. And we've kind of gotten on this track of basically repeating what the Church did at the time, right after the Protestant Reformation, when Christianity was splintering apart, right? The Church went about evangelizing and re-evangelizing by focusing on the arts. Some of the most beautiful music composed in the history of the Church, Renaissance polyphony, took place at this time when Christianity was splitting apart. There were wars, there was strife, but the Church knew that we needed to form people properly in their faith and to engage in what I suppose we could call soulcraft, right? And how the arts has a way of healing and uniting and lifting the soul. So these great compositions that then were spread throughout the great cathedrals of Europe. So we're kind of on this track now, as you mentioned before, this sort of Marian Unity tour with the Mass of the Americas. It was celebrated in Tijuana. The second time was in Tijuana to conclude a national conference of liturgical music there in the Basilica in Washington and other places, so that we kind of elevate our sense of culture and awareness of beauty and create that desire so people in the parishes will be better formed with this and have a greater desire for what is truly reverent and beautiful.
Frank, what is it about sacred music, particularly polyphony, that you think moves and inspires people across cultures and time?
Polyphony seems to flower directly out of the texts that it's setting, enhancing them for the purpose of prayer and magnifying the spiritual experience of this prayer in a way that other arts simply aren't capable of, because music changes through time in the same way that we, as we pray to God, have a perceived sense of back and forth, of dialogue, of exchange that occurs over the time of prayer.
Archbishop, a new Pew study out last week projects that by 2070, Christians will likely make up less than half the U.S. population. What can the Catholic Church do to change that trajectory?
Well, we speak about the new evangelization. I think, again, the model of what the Church did after the splintering of Christianity to elevate the arts. So we're engaging in new compositions of sacred music. Again, what Frank mentioned about true enculturation, they're compositions that reflect the times we're in, but in continuity with the tradition. So we need the arts and the music. Obviously, we need better catechesis. We need better to connect with people. So it's keeping all three transcendentals open, the truth, beauty, and goodness. We have wonderful new catechetical resources. We need to employ those. The church is still the largest private provider of services to the poor. We need to continue to do that, bearing witness to the charitable Christ, but we also need to elevate the transcendental of beauty. So I think operating with all three, truth, beauty, and goodness, getting especially into everything having to do with formation in our seminaries, our faith formation programs, in our parishes, our schools, our RCIA programs, getting it all to the proper catechesis and worship into all of these sectors will help form a Catholic soul in our people so that people will no longer say that I was raised Catholic, right? How often do we hear that I was raised Catholic as if it's something they grow out of? If we connect our people with this beautiful heritage we have, people need to appreciate the heritage they have. It's what a blessing it is to be Catholic. All the beauty the church has given to the world, all the knowledge, wisdom. It's an incredible treasure chest that we have as Catholics. People need to appreciate that. And if they learn it when they're young, well, they'll be Catholic for the rest of their lives.
Frank, what do you hope people find in the music on this CD? And how do you hope it's used going forward, the CD itself?
Well, I hope the CD becomes a tool to make people aware that music, in continuity with the great tradition of Catholic sacred music, is still being composed today. You know, there's an impression that Catholic music today is primarily folk songs, things that sound a bit dated, perhaps borrowing on styles from the 70s or 80s. And anything that's bound to a particular era like that, it can't be a permanent part of the church's sacred treasury because it comes and goes with the times. I'm trying to show that there is still a vital tradition of classical music, but classical music with a modern flavor that can continue to contribute to the church's sacred treasury. As far as the use of the music, I have created an edition of Mass of the Americas that can be sung with just choir and organ, no orchestra or any other instruments required. And I'm hoping that this will bring this music into parish worship. It already has started to.
Excellent. The Mass of the Americas, composed by Frank La ROCCA and performed by the Benedict XVI Choir, is available September 23rd, wherever music is streamed or sold. Thank you both for being here.
Well, thank you, Raymond.